Welcome to the 23rd in the 21st Century Project. What's it take to create a state? Come along as we explore how the 23rd President Benjamin Harrison has had a lasting impact on the functions of our American government, influenced historical events, and how his actions are relevant today in the current debates and situations of the 21st century. Since the founding of our country, statehood and self-governance has been the focus and the goal. The 13 colonies became the 13 states, each with their own constitutions, representation, and public officials. But how do we go from 13 to 50? What's it take to create a state? The Northwest Ordinance. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance was signed into action. America was determined to expand west, and the land west of the Ohio River would become the Northwest Territory. The ordinance would define the three things needed to create a state and would give the people of the territory basic rights as they awaited statehood. The three things needed to create a state were outlined in the ordinance. First, representatives such as a governor, an assembly, a non-voting delegate to Congress, and other officials. Second, a state constitution that is to follow the same idea of the U.S. Constitution. And lastly, a population above 60,000. In other words, territories needed Congress, Constitution, crowd. One of the first states to take part in the statehood process was Indiana, home state of Benjamin Harrison. After the Northwest Ordinance, the Indiana Territory was defined along with its neighbors, Ohio and Illinois. William Henry Harrison, the grandfather of Benjamin Harrison and the soon-to-be 9th president, was the governor of the Indiana Territory and was an important figure in the debate on statehood. By 1815, the Indiana Territorial Assembly had met and debated the matter of becoming a state. The memorial or application for statehood was sent to Congress on December 11, 1815, and the Enabling Act was passed by Congress, which allowed Indiana to continue the statehood process and elect delegates for a constitutional convention where the Indiana State Constitution was written and finalized. Finally, Indiana became a state on December 11, 1816. Harrison creates states. After the states of the Northwest Territory were admitted, we find ourselves in the late 1800s with 23rd President Benjamin Harrison. In 1889, his first year in office, Harrison admitted 4 states within a week and a half. November brought in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington. July of the following year brought Idaho and Wyoming, bringing the total to 6 states under President Harrison. The 23rd president added more states than any other president in history to this day. Harrison knew the U.S. needed to be expanded, that there were residents of those territories waiting to have their voice heard in Congress, have their own systems of self-governance, and contribute to the strength of America. Fast forward to 1959, and the last territory to be admitted as a state was Hawaii under President Eisenhower, bringing us to a total of 50 states. There are still territories within the U.S. today, but, unlike under Harrison, statehood has not been as easy of a question. The state debate. Today, the U.S. holds 5 major inhabited territories, along with other uninhabited areas, and holds a federal district called the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C. The 5 major territories are the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. are 2 areas regularly in the debate for statehood. Washington, D.C. is home to the federal government of the U.S., including countless government buildings. The debate surrounding D.C. statehood has 2 sides. The pro-state side argues that D.C. houses over 700,000 residents with no vote in Congress. D.C. residents pay more taxes than residents in 22 other states, yet have no voting representation in the legislative branch and have no say over the district's budget, even though they pay taxes. A modern-day taxation without representation. Eligible D.C. residents have to register for selective service or the military draft, despite not being a state. Finally, in 2016, 86% of D.C. residents voted in favor of statehood, yet the other side of this debate has consistently put a stop to this. People argue that the founders intended for the federal government to reside specifically in a district according to the Constitution, and therefore D.C. cannot be granted statehood. Another point made is that adding elected voting representatives from D.C. to Congress would most likely aid one political party more than the other, which some argue is unfair. If a new state was made out of D.C., it would be extremely small. It'd be 1/20th the size of Rhode Island, the current smallest state to be exact. Since the federal government buildings would have to remain in a district, the new state would be drawn around Capitol Hill. So, what should happen? DC statehood and even conversations about territories like Puerto Rico have been ongoing debates for decades. In Harrison's time, statehood was an easier conversation. The Northwest Ordinance said Congress, Constitution, and crowd made a state. This allowed Harrison to add more states in 1 year than any other president in history. But if Harrison was here, what would he do about DC? Although we'll never be able to know for sure, we know Harrison was a supporter of the statehood process, and he deeply valued voting rights for all Americans. As president, he proposed policies and legislation that would take down obstacles facing Black and female voters in the U.S. With his love for statehood and vision for voting rights, maybe this debate would have been easier settled in Harrison's time. But since Benjamin Harrison isn't here with us today, we look to the lasting legacy and passion for progress of President number 23 to help us understand our nation today in the 21st century.